Okay, sweet. I like that it just ends. Yeah, I think that the whole sitcom angle with the mid-credits was a little bit weird, but I really do appreciate what they were trying to do with it, and I get it. I actually, all things considered, like the ending in terms of where it went. Like, they thought Tara was gone, they thought it was over, but nope, she comes back, and it's actually a happy ending for all the characters. But at the same time, the world is ruined. The world isn't going back to the way it was, right? Kefka's mark on the world is indelible, and the world will never forget it. He kind of did win in the end to an extent, but he lost the ideological battle, like we were talking about. He wanted to just destroy everything because he just didn't think there's any meaning to any of it at all, right? Like that whole nihilism versus optimism thing. And the characters very slowly begin to succumb to his philosophy and worldview because they begin giving up on hope, essentially, right? During that second act of the game. And I think Celes represents that so beautifully. Like, that's what Celes embodies at the beginning of that arc. You start that arc playing as her, and she literally tries to yeet herself, right? It's that dark, and it's that dour and depressing and desperate for the characters. And I really appreciate this game for going in those directions as well. It's definitely one of the most mature Final Fantasies I've played, and the one that largely set that tone for the series going forward as well. Square really hit their stride with so much in this game. The storytelling, the character writing, the camaraderie between the characters, the world building too. Final Fantasy VII arguably is the most influential game of all time in the Final Fantasy series, but 6 is equally important, I would say. Almost, if not as influential as Final Fantasy VII. Maybe not from like a technological standpoint, because FF7 had so much going for it, including the technology, right? Final Fantasy VI here, thematically for the series, I think, and in terms of like mechanics and gameplay elements and stuff like that, was also hugely important. And I absolutely get why so many people have this as their favorite FF game. Right, and this is my review portion, by the way. I'm just going to give you guys all my thoughts on this game, or as much as I can think after literally streaming this for 12 hours tonight to finish it. I think that Final Fantasy VI, being the 10 out of 10, 15 out of 10 for a lot of people that it is, I completely get why. For me personally, I will say it's more of a 9 out of 10. And I will admit, and I've said this a couple times throughout my playthrough of it, I don't think it's my favorite of the old school Nintendo era of Final Fantasy games. That would, I think, still go to 5. Because 5 just was a complete package of fun in every which way. I think there wasn't a single aspect in that game that made me go, I really am not sure if I'm a fan of this as compared to some of the other ones from this like old school era of the games. It wasn't like the best by any means at all, don't get me wrong, in terms of the story and the characters and any one specific facet. But everything that it did do, it did decently well to really well, right? And we've been over what those elements are, and I've talked more about that in my FF5 review at the end of my final stream of that game. For many reasons that really appeal to me personally, I think 5 is, to me, the best. But 6, I think, oh, for sure, man, it did have the best story. It did have the best characters. It did have, like, they absolutely, like I said, hit their stride with it. If you want me to be really specific about why I think this game isn't my #1 spot, there are things that stand out that make me go, like during this playthrough, that made me kind of go, I don't know if I'm a fan of this, right? Those would probably be some of the gimmicky bosses. I think there were a little bit too many gimmicky bosses back to back in the middle of this game, for sure. Like, I loved the Esper system, the summon system, and how the story of the Espers and how those intertwine themselves into the gameplay and the combat and how you learn spells and everything, I think was fantastic. I just, at a certain point, got a little bit tired of kind of like playing hot potato between the characters with the different summons and learning the spells for the different characters and having to do that for like 14 different folks in the party, which I didn't have to do. I was under no obligation to do it, but just that style of play. Nothing wrong with it in particular, right? In my opinion, no such thing as a bad FF. They either appeal to you or they don't. That kind of just didn't really appeal to me much personally. I can think of better combat systems and better leveling systems and magic systems than the one that was in this game, but I really did appreciate the hell out of its unique approach that I had personally never seen before, like getting to learn Aga magic, for example, before the initial base versions, like Fire and Fire, you can learn Fire Aga right off the bat, stuff like that. And just having all these weird, iconic, wacky, unique summons I'd never heard of before. Right? You have all the iconic ones, but then there's certain ones I just had no idea existed. And it was really fun having Ian here right? Kind of going through this with me and telling me about how a lot of them reappeared in 14 and stuff. I would say overall to me, FF6 is a 9 out of 10. Great world building, great characters, great story, amazing themes, right? I think, and I am getting also why people love Kefka so much as a villain, and for a good bit of this playthrough, I was confused why he was a number 1, even above Sephiroth for a lot of people. And I think it's just because, yeah, he's one of those villains who's just evil for the sake of being evil. It's not every single day of the week you get those kind of villains. Typically in fiction, you have villains who have some kind of grand theatric motive, like they have one bad day and they have this huge ambition. Using Sephiroth as an example, he just wants to enact vengeance upon the human race for how they betrayed him and the Cetra from his point of view. There's no crazy, elaborate, human or theatric ambition like that in this game with the villains. Kefka is just a crazy, demented asshole as a result of an experiment gone wrong, who believes there's no point to anything. He's the Joker of Final Fantasy. And in hindsight, I think they did a really good job portraying that. And like I said, the reason it's more profound is because of the ideological battle it creates between nihilism and optimism. That's, in my opinion, what FF6 is ultimately about. There's so much to interpret in these games, which is what makes me appreciate them so much. I think ultimately, 6, much like other FFs can be summed up, like 7, for example, can be summed up as the importance of being yourself and true to yourself, and then going and doing amazing things when you're true to yourself. That's, in my opinion, the main message of that one. 6 here is about how even in the most dire of times, the most hopeless of times, you should never give up on hope. Good will always prevail over evil, right? Amazing game. 9 out of 10 for me personally, but I do completely understand why it is a 10 out of 10, 15 out of 10 for so many people. One of the greatest games of all time, and the favorite of a lot of people when it comes to the Final Fantasy series. Ladies and gents, that is the end of Final Fantasy VI. That's my review of the game. Highly recommend it. Highly, highly, highly recommend this one. I think there's a lot of fun to be had, and what I actually recommend even more so than just this game, if you can, is please do yourself a favor, and if it's discounted, get yourself the whole bundle. Right? This has been a wonderful, wonderful playthrough for me from beginning to end of the first 6 Final Fantasies and the Pixel collection of the Final Fantasy games. I have wanted to, like I've been saying during this marathon, visit these games for the longest time because I owe it to myself as a big fan of the Final Fantasy series who hasn't played a lot of the mainline games to do so, to finally get around to the games that kind of started it all for this series that I really know and love, and that means a lot to me personally because of a select few games here and there like 7 and 9, and I can't wait to continue. We are far from done. The plan is to play all the main lines except 11, all of them, even 7, right? Even though we played it a million times. Gotta continue my modded playthrough. But yeah, guys, I would highly recommend you to, if you're interested in this, also playing 1 through 5, because it's just worth it to be able to appreciate and witness the history and progression of the series over time. And especially if you're a fan of the series, you really start to appreciate the origins of so many things you might be a fan of in this. A lot of the iconic elements, like, chocobos, for example, which was the first Final Fantasy they came from, like Bahamut, all of that stuff. It's been so nice witnessing the history of all of it for me. Like, now knowing Chocobos came from FF2 and Bahamut was the Dragon King in FF1, just the humble beginnings to FF6. I think the progression is just so wholesome and very inspiring ultimately, and I think Square, you could really tell the passion that they put into these games and the passion that they exude, how much they cared and how much they really hit their stride with this one here. It is absolutely the pinnacle of everything they learned over the first 5 games. I can only imagine how crazy it was, because in the West originally, like we've been talking about, originally it was just Final Fantasy 1, 3, and 6. I'm sorry, 1, 4, and 6 that came out, and they were marketed as Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3. Originally in the West, the games in between didn't come out, right? Those were only in Japan. And knowing the jump between 1, 4, and 6, like, it must have blown people's minds, right? It's insane how quickly games evolved and rapidly developed back then. We could probably do like a quick ranking of some kind before we end this off of like the first 6 games from the Nintendo era. Here's how I'd rank them. Get the obvious one out of the way that I've been going on and on about. I think Final Fantasy V is my favorite one. I think that the job system was absolutely masterful. Immediately want to jump back into that one. I should mention, and I should have sort of said this during my review, like official review portion of this game. this game doesn't make me want to immediately replay it, right? Maybe I will at some point. I think it could be cool to like play with different party configurations here and there. But the game kind of already makes you do that based on who's coming and going from the party a whole bunch. Final Fantasy V, you have the same characters the entire time, but there are so many jobs you can experiment with, try out for the characters, you can make them whatever you want, and you're not going to get around to all of it in your first playthrough. You're not. But the way they're executed, the jobs in that system, is wonderful. And it makes you want to instantly go back into the game and try out the other jobs. FF5 is a game I would no shit immediately just fire back up again. I think the gameplay was fantastic. The story was decent. It has one of, if not the best death scenes in the whole franchise, with Goluf's death and how, you know, they try to actually revive him and stuff. You normally never see that, like, right? Like, even in my favorite FFs, like Zack dying, Aerith dying, you don't see the characters try to Phoenix down them or like desperately try in-game mechanics in the story, right? There isn't that like ludonarrative dissonance, or there is rather. In FF5, that isn't a thing. He dies and they immediately try all this gameplay stuff to get him back. I thought that was amazing. And just a really lighthearted story that, you know, may not have had like the most deep characters for sure, right? They finished their arcs relatively quickly, like pretty early on in the game. And they don't have a lot that really challenges them, right? Like the main character Bart's and stuff. There aren't any crazy twists or anything like that in the story, but still very enjoyable. And music, man. I actually think this game had amazing music, FF6, don't get me wrong. FF5, though, really resonated with me more. Like, how can you not love Gilgamesh's theme as well? Like, you just want to, like, stand up and start dancing, right? It's so good. FF5 is, with all of this said and done, after having played the first 6 games, my favorite Final Fantasy out of those. But FF6, I would say, is absolutely, without a doubt, my second favorite. For all the aforementioned reasons, right? It really hit their stride with this one. You can tell the love and care that went into it. You can tell that it is an extraordinarily influential game, why it is the way that it is, why it is that way, and just a very memorable story. Like, this game's narrative isn't going to leave me for all the reasons we kind of talked about a second ago with this game. Final Fantasy IV is probably my third favorite. 5, 6, and then 4. 4 is my top, is in my number 3 spot. I love this game. Love this game because of Cecil, right? At the end of the day, no shit, I think FF4 probably has the best main character out of these 3. Terra was incredible, don't get me wrong. She has a really strong story, the narrative of her being freed from servitude to the Emperor and realizing that she has this human side to her and trying to understand and learn what all these emotions are that she's never felt before, that are all these human emotions. You know, that being her arc for the duration of the game and the stuff that she goes through and how that story is told, I think are all phenomenal. But Cecil really resonated with me. He made me make a mini review for this game for my YouTube channel that wasn't a mini review. It turned into like a 20-minute review. I loved his arc. How he starts as a Dark Knight, then he becomes a Paladin, right? And how he represents this idea that today could literally be the first day of the rest of your life, right? Like we've been talking about, 6 is about good versus evil, optimism, nihilism. 4 is about any day can be the first day of the rest of your life. And I think that story is told wonderfully through Cecil. The narrative as a whole has a lot of issues, unfortunately, in my opinion. There are way too many cop-out deaths, and there are a lot of moments that would otherwise be touching, but are just a little bit are ruined by comic relief here and there, and it made it a little bit too melodramatic. But the sense of scale, the adventure, the fact you can go to the moon in that game, the fact that that game allows you to have 5 party members fighting together instead of just 4, I don't think it's the only Final Fantasy that allows that to happen, is really, really cool. So FF4 goes in my number 3 spot. As for the other 3, let's say I'm gonna go with Final Fantasy 3. Might be a bit of a hot take, I don't know. I know this is a lot of people's least favorite one, and you gotta understand, right? Granted, I'm looking at all this from the perspective of the pixel remasters. I am well aware that the original versions of some of these games, specifically between 1 and 3, had a lot of problems. Like a lot of bugs, or maybe not bugs, but things that might as well be considered bugs that made the games really difficult to play, and just a complete lack of, you know, transparency with how to do things and UI elements that made these rough. And I think 3 and 2 were especially victim to that. But 3 I really like, especially just from the perspective of the pixel remaster, because it was their first crack at the job system. 5 wasn't the first time, actually. It was actually in 3. And we really enjoyed that, right? I think it was really cool how in this game you could get Dark Knights. I didn't realize they were as early as number 3 here, that you could play as them. And we had such a good time making all our characters Dark Knights and going from there. It didn't really have a story, a very generic story about the crystals once again, and trying to protect them and preserve them and what have you. But the job system for their first crack at it was wonderfully done. Wasn't bad. I also liked and appreciated some of these quirky, unique segments where you had to go through these like really tiny tunnels by turning yourself into minis. Like that was a spell, right? You either had to turn yourself into toads to like go through these passages, and you would have to fight through special enemies as frogs because you couldn't make yourself big since you had to still be small to go through these tiny tunnels and stuff. But sometimes you'd also have to make yourself Ant-Man sized little people to go through them as well. Some really quirky, unique segments in this, and I liked how the world map was kind of laid out. It was fun working through it and all the different modes of transport and stuff. It was really cool. Final Fantasy II, I think, or no, let's say, this is a difficult one. I'm going to say Final Fantasy I goes in my 5th spot, right? I don't want to put it in my last spot because I'm tempted to put 2 here. But the reason I won't, and I'll say why, is because Final Fantasy I's the one that started it all. I gotta acknowledge that. I gotta respect it. It can't be on the last spot on my list here, right? It's gotta be the second to last. It's obviously not technically the best game. It's the very first game they ever did. But despite the fact that I'm putting it here simply because without it, we wouldn't have had the franchise, I'm also putting it here because there's some genuinely good aspects, right? I love the progression throughout the course of the game. He plays the Warriors of Light, and every time you go take on another boss at a different crystal, you unlock a series of your characters level up. They evolve, right, into a new job, right? It was like the only game that ever did that, where you're not actually playing around with any jobs, but your characters are evolving themselves. And it was just really nice witnessing the genesis of this whole series, and really got to appreciate the humble beginnings of the story of, you know, this game, and how things weren't looking too great for Square. Things were looking grim for them, and then this game turned everything around, right? This was their Final Fantasy. They were facing bankruptcy. This is why the series is called Final Fantasy. This is a Final Fantasy game they were going to make, but look at where we are now, right? Final Fantasy II, I would say, is my last on the spot. Not because it's bad. And that's the thing about these games. Okay, there we go. I think F2 has some really, really neat elements. You can call me petty. There is only one reason why, if I had to rank all of them, it'll be the last one on my spot, despite having really cool elements. Let's talk about the really cool elements first, right? It was the first one to actually experiment with a story, right? That wasn't 4, right? 2 was the first one to experiment with named characters with a story. They weren't deep by any means. They were extremely shallow, kiddie pool levels of deep. They were almost like cardboard, the characters in this game. But it's cool that, like, conceptually, they experimented with characterization. And then you also had some cool concepts like the keyword system. You would learn new keywords from certain characters and then pass them on to other NPCs to progress in certain areas and unlock certain things, progress the story that way. I thought that was cool. Apparently it sucked in OG FF2, and it's a lot better now, the Pixel remaster. So again, this is just the perspective of the Pixel version. These are all the Pixel remasters. The combat system was really unique and fun too, in my opinion, with how the characters wouldn't level up. There was no traditional concept of levels for the characters. They would instead gain proficiency with different weapons, right? The weapons you gave to them would impact what you would mold them into over the course of the game. There was kind of a job system before a job system in a way. I like that a lot. I think the one thing that makes me want to put it in the number 6 spot of my tier list, at the very bottom of my tier list here, is the fact that this game had an absurd encounter rate. The encounter rate was absurdly high. Every 2 tiles you move in this game, you run into another battle. And I think there were a bunch of rooms in the dungeons in this game that were just empty, that were just there for the sake of it. And so to laboriously get there with enemies every 2 steps you walked to then find nothing was really annoying. And it's one of the things that I unfortunately think of when I recall this game, is just that element of, my goodness, okay, we need to get past this part now, and this is kind of a slog because there are just so many trash mobs, and there do not need to be this many trash mobs. So for that reason, it's in my final spot here, because when I think about games I don't rank as high, The reason that they're ultimately where they are on the lower end of the list is because it's easy to think about their flaws. Typically, the games that I consider like the best are the games where it's hard for me to think about flaws. It is very hard for me to think about genuine flaws with Final Fantasy V. The characters not being as good as the other games is not a flaw. I have said that the story isn't the best in this game, but that's not because it's bad. The story is good. It's just not as good as some of the other games, like 6, for example. 6 absolutely has the best story. Like, the quality of the story is top-notch in 6. The quality of the characters is top-notch in 6. That's subjective, right? In my opinion, even though things weren't as in-depth with the characters and story in Final Fantasy V, they were still enjoyable. And that is what I maintain. FF5 is my favorite, 6 is my second favorite, and then 4 is my number 3. I probably shouldn't have done this. I probably should have just immediately gone and hit the hay, but it's something I was planning on doing anyway at some point, shortly after finishing the first 6 games, and I'm glad we could just get it out of the way right after finishing 6 and do this fun little segment here of me ranking my favorite FFs from the Nintendo era. But yeah, that's what it would look like. We'll see you all very soon. Take care of yourselves. I'm gonna go hit the hay. Keep on keeping the heck on.